My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guest is Attorney Calenda, who is the Republican candidate for Attorney General. Welcome back to State of the State.
Thank you for having me, Richard.
Allow me an editorial comment. We have invited incumbent Attorney General Peter Neronha to come on this program several times. Mr. Calenda agreed to debate Mr. Neronha. A couple of days before this interview, a representative of the Neronha campaign, Michelle Arias, emailed the executive producer of State of the State. She said our invitation was declined because, and I quote, "The Attorney General does not believe it is appropriate or useful to participate in a debate where the moderator has made multiple monetary contributions to one of the candidates." Ms. Arias added, again quoting, "The presence of an impartial moderator is essential to a successful and useful debate," end quote. First, in the spirit of full disclosure, I made one contribution of $100 to Mr. Calenda's campaign this year and one last year. Mr. Calenda is my lawyer, so naturally I would support his campaign. This in no way compromises my role as a debate moderator any more than a moderator who has never voted for anyone except a Democrat compromises his or her impartiality. Next, I've been a host on State of the State for almost 12 years. I've moderated debates and interviewed dozens of incumbents and candidates for elective office, Democrat, Republican, Independent, moderate, progressive, and libertarian. Never has any guest accused me of being partial, biased, or inappropriate. And finally, Mr. Neronha's predecessor, Peter Kilmartin, a Democrat, was interviewed by me on this program when he was a candidate for re-election. I saw him at an event the following day and thanked him for coming on the program. Attorney General Kilmartin said that I was, quote, "the toughest interviewer he ever faced." I asked if he thought I was fair, and he replied yes and said he would come on the program in the future. Perhaps Mr. Neronha is simply afraid to come on a debate with a fair and tough moderator. Would you like to add to that comment, Mr. Calenda?
I think it's unfortunate that the Attorney General has impugned your reputation, Richard, because I have seen many of your interviews with people across the political spectrum. And I think there's been more than fair. You've given both sides of any issue that you've ever talked about ample time to discuss their points and the counterpoints. What I believe is Mr. Neronha does not want to debate me. He does not want to debate me in any way, shape, or form, because I am going to hold him to task on the words that he's used. So, you know, in the sense of full fairness, in the sense of obligation to the public, he should have been here tonight. If he thought that you were going to ask him difficult questions or biased questions, that would have shown, and he would have been able to respond to that. You know, so and while I disagree with his characterization of what you are, I'm going to put this one out for him and make it very easy for him and anybody else who's interested in this race. Mr. Neronha, I will debate you anywhere. I will debate you anytime with a moderator of your choice at any place, so long as I have no client conflicts. So pick your time, pick your place, pick your moderator, and cut the BS.
Thank you. So you were a prosecutor in the Attorney General's office for 12 years, and I think I asked you last time, but why do you want to go back?
That's a good question, Richard. And to be quite honest with you, I had no intention of going back to that office when I left. You know, I had done 12 years. I had done some of the toughest cases that office had seen, and I was excited to go into private practice. I'm still excited to be in private practice. But being that a large portion of my work is doing criminal defense and involving the AG's office, I see the politics that is going on in that office on a daily basis. You have their line prosecutors who are getting orders from the top, from the chief of their criminal division, from the deputy attorney general, from the attorney general himself, that have taken away their discretion and made that office a political office when it's supposed to be a law enforcement office. To me, that hurts. That actually hurts me here, because that's not how our criminal justice system is supposed to work. It's supposed to be justice for all, law above politics, and law above anything else, making sure you do the right thing at all times, all the time, even if it's politically unpopular. And that's just not how that office has been. And I said, I can't sit here and complain about it if I'm not willing to do something about it. I'm willing to put myself out there, take the criticisms, take the compliments, and run for the office that I believe I'm best suited for. And I know I am best suited for the office of the Attorney General.
You have said that Attorney General Noronha, and I'm quoting it here, has used his office to play partisan politics and not be an advocate for the people of Rhode Island. Can you cite any examples?
I don't think we have to look very much farther than the gun control debates of this past year, but it wasn't just this past year. It's been since he's been in office. If you look in 2020, or it might have been 2021, he stood there with Congressman David Cicilline talking about these vast gun control bills. They were not laws at the time, they were bills that were being proposed by Congress, federal Congress, not our General Assembly. And they're talking in a very partisan group and a very partisan manner. If I'm elected Attorney General, I'm not going to be standing there with partisan politicians having partisan conferences advocating positions. I'm going to certainly give my opinion if I think there's a law that can be improved upon because it's hindering my ability to enforce our laws or fight for the rights of people. But it's not my job as the Attorney General to go advocate partisan positions. He has used every single opportunity he's had to go do just that, advocate partisan positions, as opposed to being a neutral law enforcement agent. Yes, he has to enforce the law. Yes, he's got to take sides sometimes. But for the most part, the role of the Attorney General is to be the people's attorney, to be the people's advocate, and to make sure that their rights are being enforced and that the state is safe.
Attorney General Noronha said with regard to a lawsuit that involves the state's new ban on the possession of so-called high-capacity magazines, he said that his office would represent the state in any lawsuit. However, state GOP party chairwoman Sue Cianci said on this program that when they brought a suit to the U.S. Supreme Court challenging the overrule of state law regarding absentee ballots by Secretary of State Gorbea in the 2020 election, Justice Alito declined to hear the case because there was no one present from the AG's office representing the state. Is this another example of Peter Noronha playing politics with his office?
Absolutely, and you actually cited the example of why I actually pulled the trigger to get into this race. In 2020, when there was, the laws in Rhode Island at that time required that people voting by mail had 2 witnesses and a notary. That law was not suspended by the emergency. It was not repealed by the General Assembly. The League of Women Voters and the ACLU filed suit in the federal court to waive those requirements. They filed it against the Secretary of State, but ultimately it's the job of the Attorney General to defend our laws that are constitutional. There was no suggestion that those laws were unconstitutional. They were just saying that this is an emergency, we need some dispensation for our people to vote. The Attorney General neither showed up, made no statements, filed nothing in federal court, and took no defense of our state law. And that is exactly the reason why the United States Supreme Court refused to hear the challenge from the Republican Party about the change in the law, change in the ballot procedures. There was no change in the law, the change in the ballot procedures. That is a dereliction of duty. You, as the Attorney General, left your clients, the state of Rhode Island, the people of the state of Rhode Island, without representation for no reason. And the only reason I can think of is because he wanted that to happen. That's the way to nullify a state law when you don't defend it. And since he had no reason to believe that that law was unconstitutional, he had no justification to not defend it. So that is exactly another reason why Peter Noronha has shown that his politics are above the rule of law.
Sticking with this ban on these high-capacity magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, that is now law in Rhode Island. The law gives those just merely possessing a so-called ammunition feeding device to either dispose of them in 6 months or they will face the possibility of a 2-year prison sentence or a $2,000 fine, mere possession. even if you have the magazine but you don't have a firearm that it fits, you still can be charged with a felony. While this debate was going on, Mr. Nerona sent a letter to the legislature stating that allowing existing owners to keep their magazines, such as in Massachusetts and Connecticut, our two neighboring states, quote, this would make the law unenforceable. Do you agree with that assessment?
Of course not. I mean, that's an absurd statement. The law is enforceable. There's a way to make sure that those have markings that, or have some sort of, not registration, but there's some sort of way to make sure that you know people who already have these. They do it with machine guns because the Attorney General, for example, has the ability to issue a permit to have a machine gun, which is normally illegal to possess in Rhode Island. They could do the very same thing with high-capacity magazines, that you have lawfully acquired prior to that law a high-capacity magazine, and you were able to keep that and use it lawfully, going forward. Of course, it makes things more difficult, but the laws are not easy. They're not meant to be easy. It's not meant to be easy enforcement. And to be quite honest with you, he knows that he's facing a stiff challenge on the legality and the constitutionality of those laws, because two federal judges have ruled, and that the litigation is still pending at this point because of the Supreme Court cases, but have ruled that those bans violate our Second Amendment rights to the Constitution. So I think he knows that if there was a grandfather clause, he was going to run into even more legal problems. And again, it didn't fit his narrative, which is a very anti-gun, pro-gun control narrative that he's been pushing since day one he's been in that office. So
you're talking about there's two jurisdictions, federal jurisdictions, that have ruled on it, but there was a suit entered in Rhode Island federal court. A ruling has not been handed down specifically to Rhode Island, correct?
That's correct. There is a suit that has been filed in federal court. My understanding is nothing's been heard on the merits yet. The Ninth Circuit and the Fourth Circuit have had these cases going on for some time because California and New Jersey have had those bans in effect for much longer than Rhode Island has. And at least in California, a federal judge initially struck down that law using the exact same test that the United States Supreme Court set out in the Brewing case and found it to be unconstitutional. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals disagreed, but the United States Supreme Court has vacated that judgment and sent it back down for rehearing using the Bruin test. And it's going back to that same judge who used the correct test the first time. And I have a feeling that we're going to have a resolution on this issue in those circuits before we get one here in the First Circuit.
Well, the Ninth Circuit Court is the West Coast and is regarded as a very liberal circuit, I guess you would say, right?
Generally speaking, yes. But this was a district court judge in the Ninth Circuit that initially ruled it unconstitutional. So kudos to him for following what the law required him to do.
Now, Attorney General Nerona, like Governor McKee, is a strong advocate for banning so-called military-style weapons, assault rifles, or weapons of war. Where do you stand on this?
We haven't been able to define what that means. Those are terms of art. Those are terms of politics. Those are terms meant to scare people. So if you could define what a weapon of war is, if you can define an assault weapon, I could take a look at it and tell you what I think for a legal opinion. Because right now, the Constitution says we have the right to keep and bear arms for self-defense, arms that are in common use in society. And from my understanding, all the definitions I've read that have been put forth by politicians regarding what an assault weapon is or what a weapon of war is, these would ban tens of millions of commonly owned firearms, which would be a blatant violation of the Second Amendment. So until somebody puts forward an actual definition of what those terms mean, I can't tell you that I would be in favor of something like that, because it gives prosecutors and judges far too much discretion to infringe upon our God-given constitutional rights.
I should mention that we had on this program the former Colonel of State Police, James Manny, who was the co-chair of Governor Raimondo's working group on gun safety or gun violence, whatever it was called. And we talked about exactly what you're mentioning, is that the group, this whole group, none of whom were Second Amendment advocates, could not agree on what the definition of it. They couldn't agree on what an assault rifle or weapon was. So it's a very valid point. Now, Governor Raimondo and now Governor McKee have exercised continuing declaration of emergency powers, ostensibly to protect the public from the coronavirus pandemic. Now, emergency powers, as I understand it, are limited by law. As Attorney General, would you challenge a governor who, declares emergency powers on a continuing basis?
Absolutely, and I want to make it unequivocally clear, not simply because of partisan disagreement would I do it, but it's because there needs to be a check and balance on the branches of government when they continue to use emergency powers to put forth policies that they wouldn't normally be able to put forth without going through the legislative process. It is incumbent upon the Attorney General, who is an independent constitutional officer, to serve as that check and balance, as opposed to simply a rubber stamp for the governor or any other branch of government for that matter, and put out there frank legal advice. So in my case, if I were the Attorney General the last 4 years, my advice would have been to the governor, whether it be Governor Raimondo or Governor McKee, would have been, I think you've got a problem here because this is an ongoing problem. What is the ongoing emergency that keeps justifying re-upping the emergency situation, which unlocks all these other emergency ability to pass regulations, rules, and other policies that they wouldn't normally get before us. It wouldn't normally get through the legislative process. So yes, I would do that, and that's the job. That would be the oath I'm taking as the Attorney General, to uphold the Constitution, defend the Constitution above all else. And right now we have just the Attorney General doing just the opposite, being the rubber stamp, being the political muscle for his political party, and instead of being an independent check and balance on the rest of the government.
Do you support issuing driver's licenses to people here illegally, either because they've overstayed their visa or crossed the border in the current mass migration from South and Central America through Mexico? Should they be given driver's permits or driver's licenses in Rhode Island?
I don't think they should be, but it's not because I'm against immigration or anything along those lines. I think this is a public safety issue. The border being as porous as it is, in and of itself, is a national security issue. Unfortunately, it's really in the realm of the federal government and ICE, I should say, to regulate immigration, illegal immigration or legal immigration. Here in Rhode Island, whether you choose to give driver's licenses to illegal aliens or illegal immigrants, I have a hard time wrapping my mind around that, because we, as U.S. citizens, and even people who are permanent resident aliens, you have to get insurance. And one of the factors that they take into account when they give you insurance is, you have to have a Social Security number, and they run a credit-based insurance score. Do the people who are getting these licenses, are they going to be able to meet the same qualifications to get that insurance that the rest of us have to meet? So I think we're treating different classes of people in a different way. If we could assure that they would be able to qualify under the same standards that you or I have to qualify to, then you know what? That's a political decision that needs to be made by the people who are in political offices. I don't consider the Attorney General's office a political office. It should not be. Right now it is. It should not be. And I think that that's one of the areas where, the politicians have to make the decision. And then I look at it. If they want my advice, I'm happy to give it to them. But I'm going to look at it in an equal protection type of way, whether or not all the standards apply to everybody who is eligible to get a license.
Do you have any opinion, would you care to express it, on this recent situation where 50 migrants from Venezuela were brought to Martha's Vineyard and then within 2 days were sent over to Cape Cod military base? There was also some rumors that the next flight was going to be to Newport. If you were Attorney General and this happened in Newport, for example, would you have a position one way or another on that?
Well, as Attorney General, it's really it's not within my purview to do that. This is an issue the governor of Florida is making a statement. Well, you can agree with it, you can disagree with it. And I think the statement was, you're all fine when everybody's fine when it's happening down by the border or in states that get an influx of these illegal immigrants. But when you send them to a community like Martha's Vineyard, then people take notice. They take, they pay attention to it. And I think that was his point. Could have been made in a more delicate way, perhaps. Would I have done it? Probably not. But I think that there's going to be, unless they're interfering with their ability to enforce the law or interfering in people's rights to go about their daily business, it's not something as the Attorney General I'd probably take a position on.
Okay. There was a recent shootout in Providence that you may be aware of. The Providence and State Police tactical teams. There was a 61-year-old man in a house that they knew was having a drinking problem and mental illness. Everyone had been removed from the house. The man refused to answer the first phone calls from the police negotiators. The result was hundreds of rounds were fired, and I actually saw a body cam video of one SWAT team member raising his assault rifle over the roof of an armored vehicle and emptying the magazine at the house. The medical examiner ruled the man's death a suicide. The SWAT teams were praised by many officials, including the colonels of the Providence and State Police. I have not seen any report on the number of rounds fired by the police as opposed to the man who ultimately died. What is your reaction to that? And should the Attorney General release all information in cases like these when they're closed, the investigation is complete?
Well, there's a fine line, Richard, because the Attorney General's job is to determine in those kind of cases whether the use of force by the police was reasonable. And a lot of times those investigations can drag on for a while. So the Attorney General should always avoid making statements to the public that would compromise an investigation. And when in cases where they're closed and they've made a determination and no charges are going to be filed or no discipline is going to be brought, there really should end at that statement. And we've seen from Mr. Nerona that he has had a hard time doing that. Not just with that case, but there was the case with the governor's former chief of staff, Mr. Silva, where they found that no charges were appropriate, and they actually said in their report that we could end our report right here, and they should have. But instead, they went on to do the moral preaching that we come to hear from Peter Nerona all the time. That's not his job. He's not here to be our moral conscience. He's not here to tell us who's good people, who are bad people. If you don't have evidence to put forth charges, your inquiry as the Attorney General ends there. If there's an ethics problem, you refer it to the proper ethics board. If there's some other problem, you refer it to that proper board. You're not there to come out and tarnish somebody's name that you're not going to go forward with charges with. And I think that he's done that many times. He did it when there was the bikers in Cranston, when you had the ATVs that were driving in to the stop sign. They were being chased by police. Mr. Nerona came out very quickly and made a statement that in essence made it sound like he was condemning the police officer who was ultimately exonerated. And that's why you don't make these statements before your investigation is complete. And at that point, if there are charges, you speak in court. If there are no charges, you make your statement as saying, we reviewed this evidence, we reviewed this evidence, we reviewed this evidence, and ultimately we could not find probable cause to believe a crime was committed.
And speaking about the length of time the investigations take, as you know, in North Kingstown, there's an ongoing investigation about allegations of improper conduct by the basketball coach. There's many investigations taking place, but in your experience at 12 years as a prosecutor, what is so difficult about reaching a conclusion in a case like this? Is that typical?
Those are difficult cases to begin with because of the nature of the charges, but I will say this. It's going to be much more difficult when you have internal disagreement within your office about whether or not there should be charges. And I have it on good authority that there was internal disagreement about whether or not charges should go forward. So, I mean, you've got to have, again, and the reason I think that's happening is because they're looking at this through a political lens as opposed to simply a legal lens. So they're looking at this from, is this going to hurt me politically, me being Peter Nerona? Is this going to hurt me politically if I do or don't do something here? And how is the press going to report on that? That will never be a conversation that I'm going to have in my office if I'm elected to the Attorney General, to be the Attorney General. I don't care what the political ramifications of a decision I have to make is. I am going to do the right thing every time, and I'm going to use the law and facts as I have before me to make my decisions. You may like it, you may hate it, but you're going to know that I did the right thing, and I'm going to stand by my decision.
You have said that as Attorney General, you would, quote, be more aggressive in prosecuting violent and habitual offenders. Does this imply the President Attorney General is not, or can you cite any examples that would cause you to make that statement?
Well, certainly. You have, recently he's been much more aggressive because let's face it, it's political season, so he's got to come out with a few W's on the top. But if you look at it, you have, he advocated for the lowering of a lot of these drug offenses to misdemeanors, including up to 10 grams of fentanyl. Do you know what 10 grams of fentanyl could do to the population? You go to a small city like Cranston and release 10 grams of fentanyl into the air, you're going to kill a large portion of that population. That's just one of the things that, there's always a case where the low-level cases can be diverted. Sometimes, some crimes can go to another diversionary program. But in general, if you look at the case of where that young girl, the 17-year-old girl from East Greenwich died, and I know his response will be, well, I just became the Attorney General, so how would I know? Well, his office was the one who gave that person a suspended sentence. At the time that person was sentenced, the person who killed Olivia Passaretti, he had 6 felony convictions already, not to mention all the misdemeanor convictions that he had already had. Norona's office gave him a fully suspended sentence. And I think at that point is when he realized that, we're paying attention. And this is not something that you can just go in there and be the criminal justice reformer, say you're going to do all the right things, but never do them. That's a perfect example of someone being soft on crime, saying he's going to do the right things all the time, but not doing it. That person should never have been given a suspended sentence. And he had the ability, even if he didn't have the ability at that point to file habitual notice, offender notice, he had the ability to ask for jail sentence and did not do so.
Your campaign slogan is law above politics. We've got a few minutes remaining, and I'd like you to explain that slogan, if you wish, and tell people why they should vote for you this year.
The Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer for the state of Rhode Island. It is not the chief political law enforcement officer. So I'm not running to be the Republican Attorney General or the Democrat Attorney General or whatever it is. I'm running to be your chief law enforcement officer. And that means I have to put my personal politics aside and when I enforce the law. I got to do one thing above anything else, and that's to make sure I support, defend the Constitution and enforce our laws that are consistent with the Constitution. So there are going to be many things that I may not agree with personally that I'm going to have to do, and there's going to be many things that I would want to do that I'm not going to be able to do because of the oath of office that I've taken. And has been the complete opposite under the Norona administration. He's doing everything he possibly can do to push that agenda, the political agenda, the partisan political agenda that he has been very open about. He called himself the activist Attorney General when he walked into that office to the Boston Globe. I am not going to be like that. I will be the person who protects and defends the rights of all Rhode Islanders, no matter where you come from, no matter where you've been, no matter if you voted for me or you didn't vote for me. I am always going to put the law and the Constitution above my own personal politics. And I encourage you to check me out at my website at chas4ag.com. You can read all about me. I answer my own phone calls. I answer my own emails. Try getting the current Attorney General on the phone. It's not going to happen. And I will make sure that I will be as transparent, as responsive, and most importantly, accountable to the people of Rhode Island if I'm elected the Attorney General.
I want to thank you for appearing on this program, and once again, I will invite Attorney General Norona to come on this program and be interviewed rather than in a debate format. We are taping this program on Rosh Hashanah, so we wish the Jewish members of our audience Lashona Tova. Happy New Year, happy 5783, and all of our viewers, thank you for watching State of the State.